How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, we hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask the question, is it better than Citizen Kane?
Each week on this show, we take a movie, old or new, criticized or praised, and look at it through three pieces of criteria: historical and technical relevance, how well is it doing what it's trying to do, and how does it connect with us emotionally, or do we like it?
And if you like Citizen Kane, that's fine, because we're not here to hate on it. But when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, is there something better than Citizen Kane?
Cut the crap, man. It's Shaft. Or is it? Today we're discussing the 1971 Blaxploitation action thriller.
You're damn right. Fun.
Thanks.
That's good.
Thanks. I didn't tell Parker I was going to cut him off.
Oh man, I wasn't ready. I didn't know.
Yeah. Great.
Well, hello everybody.
Hi.
Glad you're all here.
Thank you for joining us for Shaft.
For
this week.
Shaft. Okay, I'm excited about this one. I
I'm
had a good
excited
time with
too.
this.
Parker told me, I had a good time with it too. Parker told me he did a lot of research for this, which
I
is
did.
good. We're
Yep.
continuing the research.
We're doing
It's
some more research,
2024,
folks.
And Max and Parker are doing research, and by that I mean Max did research once, and Parker has done research twice.
And now Parker will be doing the research forever, always.
And Max will continue to do the bare minimum on this show. No, but yeah, I had a lot of fun with Shaft.
Yeah, I did too.
It was a good time. We watched it together,
We did.
which was fun.
What is your history with Shaft?
Nothing really.
Just non-existent.
Well, no. So like Shaft's one of those movies that like, okay, hang on. So yeah, I'm sure I'd heard like the words theme from Shaft at some point.
Sure.
But I hadn't even really heard the song before.
Really?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So like my experience from like film school with like Blaxploitation film, we didn't watch Shaft. We watched another one. And maybe just clips from another one. I think it was one of those where it was like, and this happened. And I was like, great.
Sure.
And then in 2019, they did the third movie called Shaft, which is not the third Shaft movie.
No.
But it brings back Richard Roundtree and it brings back Samuel L. Jackson and introduces a new Shaft because they're all in the same universe.
Right.
And I did the research on that, and that was interesting to my 2019-year-old self brain of like, oh, so the 2000 Shaft wasn't a reboot?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was, but it wasn't. And this new one brings them all together. It's like a legacy sequel for both Shaft franchises. And I was like, interesting. And I just really liked the orange coats that they all wore in that movie. And I joked with my friends. I was like, can we get those coats? Or is that like, do we not look good in those coats? I don't know. But at some point, I would like to have matching coats with, I guess, my dad. That'd be great. And my kid.
Yeah.
We could all...
I think you should.
I think that would be fun.
Yeah.
Have to pick a color. Anyway, that's
Purple.
yeah. I think yeah.
Yeah, all three of you purple?
Well, the other day we were talking about what we'd wear on a red carpet, and you said purple, and then when I said purple, I felt bad.
Yeah.
But what if we all just wore purple?
It's a good color.
Like if you, Will, and I ended up on a carpet somewhere and we all wore purple.
Hey,
not a bad idea.
It's the color of the Criterion cover for this movie.
It's a good
color.
It's a good color. What's yours? Can't believe my history of Shaft is, well, as a legacy franchise, I was really interested in it. But that's the truth. What was your experience with Shaft, Parker?
Somewhat similar. I'd never seen it before. I had heard about it. I'd heard the theme before. I did have that leg up on you. I'd heard the music before, and I really liked the music and the theme. And I knew of its reputation through just kind of generalized in like a film history class I took in undergrad. We briefly touched on like Blaxploitation cinema, and name drops like this and Foxy Brown and things like that.
Yeah.
But that was about it. I had never I really knew very little about it other than that I knew he was a detective, and that was it. I was like, okay, sure.
Yeah, and that like came up for me as well when I was doing my little research 5 years ago. Well,
wow, you really prepped in advance for this.
I really did. Well, but then it got added to the Criterion collection, and so I kept seeing it. I kept seeing that cover they did for it, and I kept being like, this would be fun to watch at some point.
Totally.
And so...
And it was indeed fun to watch.
And it was fun to watch.
At some point.
Yeah. At some... Well, a week ago. Or whenever we watched this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. we'll touch on this more as we go, obviously when we get to the criteria, but just general thoughts, because this was your and I's first time watching this. Just general vibes with it. What'd you think?
I really liked it.
Yeah.
I think it's really fun. I think it's a fun watch.
Mm-hmm.
Very like easy to watch. It's like, I don't know, like it's interesting in that it's like, it's an action film that is not like the best action in the world, but it's like still good to watch. Like it's well crafted, but not in the way that people often say that, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What am I trying to say here, Parker? What do you think of the movie?
I think it's really well put together. I think it's very entertaining to watch. It's got a very fun energy to it that I like quite a bit. I think like the plot isn't really the main focus of the movie. Like it's not like a plotty movie in that way. It's much more about just like the action and the beats and the characters and the music.
Yeah, and like they have a plot that Shaft is, unraveling.
Right.
But I mean, and that's like it works. It's not like it's not without story.
No, not at all.
But it is kind of just like you're just going to go along for this little ride.
Yeah, like it seems to me and I don't know, like in my research I couldn't find anything that said this specifically, but like it almost feels as if it was designed like set piece by set piece and then put like a string of a plot to connect those ideas together. Like it's like, here are the moments and the scenes we want to do, and then we will create something to kind of
like throwing a man out the window and then quickly going, yeah, but that actually doesn't matter at all.
Right.
That's just like a tool with which someone will contact you.
Totally.
You're right.
Yeah.
Because they really just move past that.
Yeah, they're just like, okay, let's keep moving.
Once he gets thrown out the window, they're like, like Bumpy comes and he's like, are you mad about that? And he's like, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
It's like, I have something else entirely to talk to you
it's
about.
Like, this doesn't matter to me. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I had a good time with it.
Yeah, it was really fun. Very watchable.
Very
I think
watchable.
that's what I can say about it.
Yeah.
It's well crafted in a way that's very watchable.
Totally.
And
okay.
Now
Parker
presents
for the research corner with Parker
Research
Rawlins.
Corner with Parker Rawlins. Great.
So I wanted to talk a little bit just about Blaxploitation as a genre to get kind of the stage set, and then after that, I thought it would be good for us to jump into summary.
Yeah.
And as we go through summary, I'll kind of sprinkle in stuff about the movie specifically that I found out.
Cool.
That
sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, so Blaxploitation is a film genre, a film movement of the early to mid 70s. The term was originally coined by the head of the Los Angeles NAACP, Junius Griffin, and originally it was very much meant as a criticism of the genre. He didn't like it very much. He coined the term in August of 1972.
The name of it. Being like a plan of exploitation. You'd think.
Exactly. And so like the defining features of Blaxploitation are exploitative tales of sex, drugs, crime, violence, and black power is kind of the melting pot going on there. And Griffin claimed that the genre was proliferating offenses to the black community in its perpetuation of stereotypes often involved in crime. So he looked at this and he's like, this isn't empowering to us. This is very much perpetuating harmful stereotypes that exist. And that term existed and then was essentially like repurposed as, well, no, we're going to wear this as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
That became the term for the film movement.
Okay, cool.
Which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So some background of kind of where this all came from is in the late 60s, white middle-class Americans were moving out to the suburbs, leaving the cities, which then left cinemas in the cities with declining revenues and smaller audiences. They were really hurting. And a lot of the people left in the cities were minorities, especially black communities. And these theaters and filmmakers were trying to say, okay, how do we appeal to these communities that are still here? How do we get people into theaters in cities, essentially? The civil rights movement is in full swing. A lot is going on with the idea of race in America. And a lot of black creators were wanting to express that in their art.
Yeah.
One of those people, who is referred to as the godfather of Blaxploitation, was a man named Melvin Van Peebles. And he was arguably the first filmmaker to get the genre of Blaxploitation cinema off the ground with his film Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song in 1971. I was wondering if maybe that was the one that you kind of seen clips of.
Yeah, that's the one I think a lot of.
And for those of you at home, I love the fact that Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song is spelled with 2 A's in the bad and 6 S's on the S. It's fun. But his goal was that he wanted to create a film that like accurately represented his experience in life of like the Black experience of what he observed, what he'd lived, all these different things. He directed, wrote, scored, edited, and starred in it himself.
Okay.
And it was premiered in 2 theaters in Detroit and Atlanta. And on a budget of $150,000, it made $10 million
Okay.
at the box office. And so everybody started paying attention.
Right.
To the point that what happened later led us to Shaft. Shaft was released 2 months later, and it's the first studio Blaxploitation film.
Interesting.
MGM funded it. They saw, the rumblings of what was going on over with Sweet Sweetbacks. Kind of, they're put into production approximately the same time. But then as soon as this success happens, they're like, oh, okay, we really need to, again, 2 months later, they're like, boom, okay, here it is.
Yeah.
Right? So that kind of got the ball rolling. And the genre ran from the early 70s to like mid 70s. It kind of peters out by like 77, 78.
Okay.
But as it went along, it gained quite a bit of traction. So back with Sweet Sweetbacks, Huey P. Newton, the leader of the Black Panthers, loved the movie, like was a huge proponent of Sweet Sweetbacks. And he said, quote, "Finally, there was a movie out with some consciousness in it and had all the elements for a possible revolutionary movie." And so from there, you have this huge explosion of studios smelling money, starting to put films like this into production.
Yeah.
And very quickly, like it's part of what made Blaxploitation cinema kind of burn out so quickly was just a huge oversaturation of the market. So you have this, 2 months later, you have Shaft. And then in the course of like 3 years, you get the big ones of the genre. So you get stuff like Cleopatra Jones, Foxy Brown, Superfly, Blackula. They all happen within like 3 years of each other.
Well, and even the entire Shaft franchise did. Basically, the original one with Richard Roundtree, there was a sequel to this a year later called Shaft's Big Score. And there was another one called Shaft Goes to Africa or Shaft in Africa. And then there was a TV series. And all of that happened. Everything with the original Richard Roundtree Shaft happened between 1971 and 1975.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, so take that energy of this franchise and apply it to the entire genre. And that was what was going on, is that they quickly, like, it started very much as what Shaft is, with very grounded, like, crime thrillers, right? And then from there, they spin out into all sorts of other genres. They do horror, they do kung fu, they do westerns. There's all sorts of stuff happening. And as that's going on, you've got kind of 2 main issues that come up, which is one, just the oversaturation of the market. Everybody's making these and people kind of get tired of seeing them so quickly, so often.
Yeah.
And also, there were people within the Black community who started pushing back against the films a little bit. More conservative Black activist groups, such as the Coalition Against Blaxploitation, kind of like boycotted the movies and spoke out against them and said, hey, we don't like the stereotypes here, all of these different things.
Right.
And it became, a sort of conversation of sorts.
Yeah.
But eventually it burns itself out rather quickly. But into the 90s, you have this new batch of filmmakers who grew up watching these films, such as people as Spike Lee.
Yeah.
And that leads to the new Black realism movement of the 90s.
Cool.
And we see that, and it pulls a lot of its influences and its stars from like the Blaxploitation pool of the 70s.
Cool.
So that's a pretty like super quick 101 of like the movement and the genre as a whole.
Okay.
And Shaft's place within all of that is as the first studio film of it. Like MGM backed this, and it was a big deal for that to happen. And that's kind of why Shaft holds, well, one of the reasons why Shaft holds its kind of historical place in all of that. So there's some context.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in on some summary?
Yeah, sure. We open with Shaft walking down the street to the theme from Shaft.
Yes.
Which is wild. I can't believe they got the rights to the theme from Shaft.
That's nuts that they got it.
And he's just looking cool as hell. Literally. Like, has a man ever looked cooler?
No.
I don't think so.
I don't know. There's a really great featurette on the Criterion from the costume designer, and he was talking about how his costume is like a variety of different elements that they wanted to pull of making him stand out. So the trench coat is very noir.
Yes,
that's what they wanted to do, but the leather makes it inner city. It makes it black. And also, it's like something I thought was really funny that he talked about is that he was like, hey, it catches your eye, it catches the light. Like, we put an extra gloss on the leather. Like, there's a spray you can get to make it even glossier. He's like, and that's a statement piece if you're walking around New York. He's like, because you have to be enough of a badass to keep that coat. He's like, somebody's going to steal your shit.
Yeah.
And usually you want to keep as low of a profile as possible so that doesn't happen. And a coat like that is a statement piece.
Yeah.
Daring people to be like, yeah, come take it. Right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was really fun. He said that the tweed suit underneath is kind of a repurposing of very like white professorial sort of vibes. Yeah, it's
very like academic.
Yeah, so they took that.
That's cool.
They tried him in button-ups and a tie, and it didn't work. And so the turtleneck came about because he's like, hey, this is still classy, but it's much more casual. It's much more agile, and you have a bit more give with a sweater than you do with a button-down. It doesn't look as stuffy. And so I just thought that was so interesting that like every piece of that outfit is very specifically decided, and it comes together to just be like the coolest anybody's ever looked.
I think it's like the easily top like cinematic looks anyone's ever had. Yeah. So he walks, and it's the whole song.
It is.
He's just walking. It's great. It's a
the
great
song,
intro, opening credits.
I love the song. And the songs in this film, but especially the theme, like almost operate on musical rules. Like it's telling you stuff about him and about the story.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, like the opening line of the theme song is like, who's that black private dick? Who's the sex machine with the chicks? And they go, Shaft. You're damn right. And it's like, it's operating off of like character introduction song. I am song.
Totally. Yeah. Eat your heart out opening of Beauty and the Beast.
Man, that's really great.
Yeah.
So he walks, and then he goes to visit he goes to the barbershop, I think, first, right?
Yeah.
He goes there, and they're like, hey, 2 guys were looking for you. They had guns. He's like, all right, got it.
Yeah.
He heads back out. He runs into Lieutenant Vic. His name is Vic. They call him Vic, right?
I think so.
Vic's in this scene, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Vic runs into him and is like, hey, Shaft, all these guys were looking for you. They had guns. Like, what's going on? What are you doing? And this is where I learned, and this is really embarrassing for me as someone who has been working on a screenplay about a private detective who has like a touchy relationship with the police. I didn't realize that the police gave you like licenses to be a private detective. I had no idea. I always wondered. I was like, what gives you the right to just be a private eye?
Right. Because he threatens him with that.
He threatens him with that at a certain point. He's like, I'm gonna take back your badge, and you won't be able to walk around. You won't have like a gun license. You won't be able to like do all this stuff.
Yeah, you'll be on probation for 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. And he threatens him with that in this scene, right? Maybe that's a little late.
I think he mentions it, but then like the other police chief or inspector, like he really doesn't like Shaft later on.
As you said, the most like, give me your gun and your badge guy you've ever seen.
Absolutely.
It's like we didn't realize it was such like a played straight moment. Yeah. And of course, I mean, I guess all the parodies have to come from somewhere.
Totally.
But yeah, so he runs into Vic, and Vic's just kind of like, hey, just vaguely, and he's just cool.
Yeah.
He's so cool. And he just brushes them off, and they're like, well, where are you going? He's like, I'm gonna go get laid. What are you doing? That's awesome.
He laughs.
And then he laughs. There's a lot of like big laughs from Richard Roundtree as Shaft, which is so delightful.
It's really
great.
He's
really delightful to watch in this role, and it's like a role that you're like, all right, he's sleeping around, you know, he is like kind of a cop, but it's like, no, this guy's still cool though.
Totally.
Anyway, so he tries to go home. There's one of the men in the trench coat with the gun waiting for him, so he sneaks around the back and then like hits him really hard, and he goes, yeah, sorry, my friend's sick, and he takes him upstairs.
It was so close to like what we would get a decade later with like Arnold stuff of like, my friend, he's dead tired. Like, I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Very like action hero-y from what we'd see from like action heroes for decades. Anyway, so they go upstairs and they have a big old tussle. Who do they work for again? Do they work for Bumpy or?
Yeah, they work for Bumpy.
Right, and they're like, Bumpy wants to talk to you, basically, right? That's all they're trying to say.
Yeah, but they come in way too hot.
They come in way too hot to the point that after the fight's over, one of them goes out the window.
Yeah. Which, something you and I commented on while we were watching it, then kind of came up in my research is during this fight scene, there's very interesting like POV shots.
Yes.
Like they're like grabbing the camera.
There's a shot where like someone's thumb is like their
like
thumbs
on
are
the
around
lens,
the lens
as if
you
it
can
is,
see them
you know,
as if it's,
like you're in Shaft's POV or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really interesting. And part of that comes from the director. So the director, Gordon Parks, is a super interesting guy. Like
really?
I want to find out as much as I can about this dude because he, before he ever made films, he was a photographer. He was one of the first black photographers to be featured in Life magazine.
Okay, cool.
In 1948.
Rad.
He was also a published author. His first film was an adaptation of his own novel.
Wow.
Right before this.
All right.
And the script was originally written for a white actor. And then he came in and...
it's based on a book. But it's not... The Shaft is based on a book, but it's not based on one of his books.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the book about a white detective?
I would assume so.
Yeah.
If
they wrote the screenplay for a red. Wow. Okay.
That would be my assumption.
Yeah.
But he came in and it was interesting because he talks about how he's like, he wasn't setting out to make a blaxploitation film. He was making an action movie with black lead. Okay. He's like, his whole goal was that he's like, he said he wanted black people to be able to enjoy a movie on a Saturday night, and that date night would include a superhero who looked like an African-American person that was defying gravity, is how he described it.
Yeah.
Is that he's like,
cool.
Let's just make him a superhero.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. But back to the POV thing, like a lot of like, he starts setting a lot of like the stylistic elements for blaxploitation films. And one of those is kind of a grittiness to the film stock, to the color, and to the shooting style. There's a lot of zooms.
Yes.
There's a lot of POVs. There's that really interesting choice where Bumpy looks directly at camera later on.
And I went, oh, hello. And then Parker literally went, hey, Bumpy. And I just thought that was the funniest. It was so funny. That was really interesting. It was an interesting choice. Cool. Okay. Yeah, interesting.
Just interesting stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So the guy goes out the window. Immediately Shaft's in trouble with like Vic and like the guy we were talking about.
Yeah, they're like, you murdered somebody.
Yeah, you murdered, and all you know about this friend of yours is that his first name is Tex, and he goes, yeah, that's it. That's all you know about him. And again, they're just kind of like getting real mad at him, and he's just like, whatever. And he
just doesn't care.
He talks about like the black experience or whatever, and Vic's really just where Vic's like, don't pull that black shit on me, and I was like, interesting relationship.
Yeah. And they have a really funny moment in there where Vic, he holds up a pen and he's like, you're not so black.
Yeah.
Shaft holds up a white teacup. He's like, yeah, man, you ain't so white.
Yeah.
It's a really, he just laughs at his own joke. And Vic's like, you got me. Yeah. Vic's chill.
Vic's chill. He's a chill guy. Still a cop.
Still a cop.
I don't know if I'd go as far as to... Awkward. No. But this is a really funny movie as well.
It is a very funny movie.
There's so many good like lines like that and good like quips and stuff that are really, again, it's just very fun to watch.
Yeah.
Shaft leaves, maybe with another line about gonna go have sex, maybe?
Probably.
'Cause doesn't he go home right after that?
Yeah, he does.
And he has sex. And there's a really... No, wait. No, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. He goes home and his girlfriend walks into her apartment and he is just splayed out on the couch naked.
Yeah, reading a magazine. Yeah. And then they have sex. And it's a really... I think it's a pretty nice sex montage of like... There's like circle,
Yeah,
it's like
eat your heart out, Wong Kar-wai.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this looks like.
Yeah, it's exactly it. And it's like this really nice like fades and you like see her like hands behind his back and like they like,
these circles of colors, really cool.
And some colors. And then it hard cuts to Shaft eating a hot dog, taking like the biggest bite out of the hot dog, and that was like the biggest laugh Parker had all night. Oh
man, I was losing it. It's such a funny cut.
It's really funny. Vic runs, so that's when Vic sees him again.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, what have you done? Like to solve this case? He's like, I got to go right now.
Yeah,
and he goes.
He's like, where have you been? Getting laid.
Yeah, exactly. Like he said what he said he was going to do.
Yeah, he's a man of his word.
And is this where we get the Soulsville montage?
I think so. Yeah, because he decides that like, because I can't remember. Does he talk to Bumpy because he needs to go? Eventually, he's going to go look for Ben. That's the whole thing, right?
Yeah, but he doesn't know where Ben is.
Not yet.
So that's why he's going around.
Right. That's okay. Yeah. So it's that montage.
Yeah.
Which I also found out during that montage when he goes to Ben's old apartment and the landlord answers. That's the director.
Oh,
that's
great.
Gordon Parks.
Oh,
so
nice.
He's like, well, tell me if you find him. He owes me 6 months rent. So that's a little director cameo.
I really like this montage, and I really like this song by Isaac Hayes. Interesting thing about Isaac Hayes, who wrote the theme from Shaft and like did this whole album, is that he auditioned for the role of Shaft, and they didn't cast him. They cast Richard Roundtree, but they liked him so much that they had him do the music. But I think the Soulsville montage is really interesting because the movie takes a second to just portray like the living, conditions of these people in the city, and like Soulsville is entirely about the Black experience and how like the chains that hold, like they should live free, they don't. The chains are hard to see. Can't get a job. Welfare is up. Like you're in a building that's falling apart. Like all of this stuff is, and it's just very interesting montage of just Shaft going to like get information from people, and you see him like interacting with like community members. And it's really cool and interesting. It's something that, the noir reference is there, but like this is such like a different version of that.
And something that they talked about in like the behind the scenes documentary that I thought was really interesting about this scene and also about the opening is like two pieces of information they always wanted to portray about Shaft visually is like in the opening, he just walks into traffic. He doesn't care, right? Like he owns that city. And they're like, that is really powerful to see a Black man doing in the 70s of just like, no, I am taking up space fully. Something else they talked about, kind of jumping a little bit back and then I'll go forward of, they talked about, they're like, in context of the time period, it still needs to be talked about, like how, at least at this point, it gets better as Blaxploitation goes on with, female-led movies. But like this movie particularly, women aren't characters. No. They're just objects. They're just here. And it's, it's the same if you went to go see a James Bond movie of this era. Like it is a product of its time in that way. And it's worth pointing out and worth talking about. But something they mentioned in the documentary that I thought was interesting is that they're like, it's important that Shaft is a sexual being. Like that is an important thing because it's always consensual. He's not aggressive. He's not belligerent. It's a big deal later on because the first scene is with his girlfriend who is Black. And then later on, he hooks up with another woman who is white. And that's another big deal of like, hey, look, like, this just wasn't being shown on screen at all. And that's a huge deal. And coming back to this montage, something that I love that they were talking about is that they're like, what's really great about Shaft is his social mobility. He knows everybody. He knows, like, he works with the police who are white. He knows the gay bartender in the village and is close with him. He knows, these people at the hot dog stands and people sitting by the, dumpster fires and all these things.
He knows the man on the street who tells him where Ben is eventually. But then he also knows that kid who's like clearly just like a high kind of like late 60s like hippie kid.
Right.
And he's like, hey, I know you. What's going on? Can you go turn on the lights in my apartment?
Yeah.
Like he knows everybody.
And so they just talked about how like that made a really big impact too, to just see him navigating all of those spaces and not being separated by any sort of social class or racial class.
Yeah, which is also interesting because so many detective characters always have that trait. But they're like, especially like white detectives. Like Sherlock Holmes' big thing was having the network of all the street urchins who, they'd get him information and like you think about again, like all the noir guys would like go up to somebody and be like, hey, well, what do you know about this? And he's like, oh, well, he's down here. But like it's recontextualized in a really interesting way by having Shaft be a Black man in New York doing these things.
Totally.
And to still commit to showing that fully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it gets really well illustrated during that montage. For sure. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I didn't say it at all when we were watching, but I really enjoyed that montage.
Yeah.
So he learns where Ben is. Ben, I can't remember his last name, but Ben is who he needs to go see.
Ben Buford.
Wait, we totally skipped over the whole Bumpy part.
That's why I was like, did we meet Bumpy already?
We hadn't met Bumpy yet.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody.
That happens, but
before Shaft really gets on the case, because he wouldn't even know what he's doing yet.
Right.
Bumpy comes to because he calls somebody and he says like, hey, tell Bumpy to meet me in my office tomorrow, whatever. He goes and he's late and they're like, Bumpy's like guy is really mad about this. But what's his last name?
Bumpy's?
Yeah.
Jonas.
Bumpy Jonas. Bumpy Jonas is like a gang leader, like
like
right,
or
like
boss.
a mob boss, And he comes to Shaft because his daughter has been kidnapped, and he doesn't know who did it. Yeah. So he hires Shaft to figure it out, and Shaft's like, "Why am I going to do that?" And he does.
And he's like, I think Ben did it. Like, he's like, I need you to find Ben.
Yes.
Because either he did it or he knows who did it, is like what Bumpy tells him.
Exactly. And this is a really interesting scene. This is the scene where Bumpy looks to camera, or is that later?
That's later. That's when
later.
Ben's there.
But this is the moment where Bumpy cries.
Yeah.
And he's being very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting too, because typically like mob boss, but especially like this black man who's like one of the scariest guys in New York, what we've heard about him, he like comes to Shaft and he's crying and is like, I need you to find my daughter.
And also Shaft's reaction to that is very unexpected, where he's not like, shut up, man. Like, man up. Like he's not belligerent. Like you can kind of tell that he's a little bit taken aback by like this display of vulnerability, but he doesn't berate him over it.
No.
Like he just kind of gives him space to be emotional about it, which is just very interesting.
It's very interesting. And so that's how he ends up on the case fully. So he goes to where Ben is. Mm-hmm. He gets in there. He also has a costume change. He has a few costume changes in this.
He does.
Wait, does he? He doesn't change here though. He changes later. I was thinking of when he starts wearing the black sweater.
Oh,
but that's
right.
later. Sorry, everybody. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm doing so. Parker always asks me to do the summary. No. Anyway, so that's where he is. He goes to find Ben. Ben's kind of like holed up somewhere with his gang of guys, like his friends. And Shaft's like, we gotta go. Or he's like, do you know what happened to this girl? And then there's like the place is like raided, right? By cops?
No, by the
mob. By the mafia. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. Oh man. Are you sure you don't want to do this?
No, you're doing great.
Yeah, so the mafia raids the place and they're like, we gotta go. They kind of get split up. All of Ben's friends get killed. Mm-hmm. But Shaft and Ben make their escape. But not before stopping into a woman's apartment while they're hiding out.
Yeah.
And this is a really interesting scene too to me, where, where Ben grabs like a knitting needle.
Yeah.
To like basically kill Shaft. He's like, you set us up. You did this. And Shaft's like, I didn't do shit.
Yeah.
And then the woman whose apartment they've crashed into is like, young man, don't. Mm-hmm. I thought that was very interesting. Of like also having this like maternal figure show up briefly for Ben.
Right.
And his like just this woman.
And she's very sincere in her line delivery. It is very much just like, you don't want to do
you
this.
Don't
like,
do
please.
This. Yeah. So that was just also a very interesting inclusion that really stood out to me, like a moment that stood out to me. But yeah, so from there they run out. Where do they go from here?
From there they go. I'm trying to remember.
No, he takes him to his friend's house. He takes Ben to his friend's house and says, you can stay here for a bit while I go talk to the police. Mm-hmm. So he takes Ben, puts him in another, like a safe house, basically.
Yeah.
Another woman who is like done with Ben's shit and is like, you're going to sleep in my daughter's bedroom. Like, right? She has a line. I can't remember what the line is, but she also has like something very like, I don't know. Like there's just like that presence, which is interesting too.
Totally.
Or like, yeah. Mm-hmm. So Shaft goes to talk to the police.
Yeah.
And, right? Or does he go talk to Bumpy? Because at this point he's figured out, at this point, around this time, he figures out that Bumpy set him up.
Right.
Right? There's more going on here. So he goes and talks to Vic, or he calls Vic.
Yeah.
Man,
yeah, because like Vic, there's two pictures of like the mafioso men that just showed up in New York.
Right.
And so like Vic is like, what is going on? Like, you have to trust me. You have to let me in on this.
Yeah.
He tells him that he already knew that Bumpy was looking for Shaft, but he's like, I'm in the dark aside from that. Like, that's where I stop with all of this, and I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Shaft still very much like plays it close to the chest.
Yeah.
And he's like, nope, I'm still just gonna do my thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And then from there, he figures out that the mafioso are watching his place.
Right. But he also knows now, he's basically figured it out, that Bumpy set him up in that the mafia have Bumpy's daughter.
Right.
And basically this is like a turf war that's going to happen between the mafia and Bumpy's mob, basically. And the public won't see that as a gang war. They'll see it as white versus black.
Right.
Which is a problem. Like, there's basically a war is going to break out in the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? Things are going to boil over, and Shaft's kind of caught in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, very intentionally.
Right.
Yeah, on someone else's part, not his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody put him there, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the setting of the stage of what's going on.
So yeah, Shaft knows that the mafioso are like watching his apartment. So he pays a kid to go up turn on the lights in his apartment. He goes into this bar where these men are, right? Is that where
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
at
yeah.
already?
Yeah.
There was a big shootout, by the way.
Right.
When Ben and Shaft were getting away. I just
you covered that.
forgot to mention, I know, I just forgot to mention the action.
Right.
This is a great scene.
It's a really good
Shaft
scene.
goes in and he tells the bartender, I had missed that they knew each other previously, but he asks the bartender, he's like, hey, I'm just going to hop back here and can you go out and I'll man the bar? And he's like, have funsies, which is like, I didn't know that word existed in 1971. But it's interesting because initially with this bartender character, you go, okay, so he's clearly gay. He's like a gay stereotype.
Right.
It's just going to be like a little portrayal that's like, okay, whatever. It was the 70s. Because that's on the mind. Yeah. Shaft goes to the bar and he starts serving these men who are watching his apartment. And he's like, hey, well, it's on the house. I'll have some too. He's also just
has a drink with these guys.
Has a drink with these guys and is asking them questions. And then while this is happening, the bartender comes back and he's like, hey, that woman over there with the groovy boobs says that you turn her on and you should go talk to her. And he like says something else about her boobs too.
Yeah.
But he also says,
does he call her bodacious? Is that word thrown around?
He also says, and I'm gay. Like he says, I'm gay, which was very surprising.
Totally.
And I didn't actually fact check this, but I did read that this is like one of the first characters on screen in cinema to say I'm gay, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And very cool. But yeah, and so then Shaft goes over and he has this great line where he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you my name.
Yeah. Well, first he gets on the phone and pretends he's talking to a girlfriend.
Oh, that's true. But he's talking to Vic. He's like, hey, can you send?
He's like,
can you
hey,
send a
baby.
car here? Can you send? Yeah, and that's great. And Vic just
catches up.
He's
done this before, and so he's like, "Do you need help?" He's like, "Oh, you know it, baby." And he's like, "Well, how many others?" He's like, "About 2." Like he's giving him everything he needs.
Yeah, it's really fun.
But then he has this line that you were talking about,
which is where he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say my name, right?" And then he says, "It's John Shaft," and he pulls a gun on him, which is very fun.
Yeah, and then the police rush in.
The police come in, they grab him,
and one of the mafioso spits on him.
Yeah.
And he grabs a bottle and he breaks it over the dude's
I
head,
forgot about that. He just breaks a bottle over this guy's head.
I thought was really interesting because in the documentary they were talking about how that is sort of I don't think this was intentional on the parts of the filmmakers. This is more like looking back through film history and finding things right. Of like, it feels like such an interesting callback to Sidney Poitier in The Heat of the Night. Which is the slap moment, right? Have you heard about this?
No, I don't think so.
So in that movie, he's a black detective in the South.
Gotcha.
And they go to see this guy, and he is, basically a plantation owner. Is essentially this dude's shtick or whatever. And at a certain point, he like backhands Sidney Poitier's character and like calls him boy, and Sidney Poitier slaps him right back.
Yeah.
And it's a huge deal. I'm trying to remember. It's the 60s. Let me see the exact year.
Is it like 62?
67.
So later.
Yeah, so 4 years before this.
Yeah.
And that was a huge moment on screen. It's just like, you never saw a black man strike a white man, right? And it's a very firm slap, but it is still kind of that backhand. And this feels like an escalation of that. It's like, no, it's a bottle this time. Like, that's where we're at now.
Yeah,
and I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So they take the mafiosos to, like, the police. And then they
basically just sort of like they just sit down and they're just being tight-lipped. He's like, "Are you gonna tell me anything about where they're holding this girl?" And he's like, "No, we're not gonna do that." And they're trying to, they're like, we're not gonna talk without a lawyer or whatever else. Right. And Shaft is like, "Well, I don't care. Like, I don't have to work around procedure. Like that doesn't matter to me at all, right? Like that's kind of what's going on there." But then you find out that the room was bugged. The asshole police dude bugged the room and heard Shaft talking about all this and admitting, hey, there was a kidnap. Like they get all that stuff he's been keeping from them. Bumpy's daughter's been kidnapped. That's what's going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, do you want to take over for a bit? Because I'm like...
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. I pulled up the synopsis to kind of follow along.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, you're good.
So from there, what happens, Parker?
From there, Ben and Shaft go to the apartment where she's being held.
Oh, yes.
Like, because what happens is he's at like a diner to meet this guy.
Yeah.
And he goes and he waits for this
So we
dude.
get the costume change where he's got the black sweater with the black
Right.
leather jacket.
And he tells Ben, he's like, hey, you tail us. Like, you and a couple of your guys follow us. And I think... It doesn't say in here, but somewhere around this point, Ben and Shaft go talk to Bumpy.
They do. I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where Shaft confronts Bumpy about all this, and Bumpy's
Right.
like, yeah, you got me, you're right.
Yeah.
But...
And so then he makes a deal where he's like, if we're gonna do this, like, we need men, we need an army, and that's where Ben comes in. And Ben's like, I'm not putting my guys on the line for anything less than like 10 grand a head, basically. Like, that is how much one of my guys is worth.
Yeah.
And so Bumpy's like, yeah, fine, sure, like whatever it's
and they're
gonna
kind of
take.
like testing him, like, you're not gonna get us
Totally.
that money.
Like, they give him a really big number, and he's like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's the idea, right? So they're like, okay, we're gonna bait these guys. Ben, you follow me, and then we'll know where she's being held, and we'll be able to get her, right? So this mafioso dude shows up, and they exchange words and slurs with each other.
They do.
Yeah.
They exchange slurs.
And then they go, Ben and a couple of his guys follow them, and they get to the place where Bumpy's daughter is being held.
Yes.
And then right before they walk in, Shaft pulls a gun on the guy and it's like, hey, like, any false moves, I'll blow your brains out. He's like, you don't understand. Like, these guys will shoot me before they let her go. Like, that's the level we're working
And
at.
Shaft gets shot.
Yeah, they shoot the dude and they shoot Shaft through the dude, basically.
Yeah.
And then one of the guys races out with Bumpy's daughter, and Shaft is basically unconscious. Like, he's badly hurt.
Yeah, he comes to. He's at his house with his girlfriend, and there's a doctor who's taking care of him, right?
Yep.
And he has to get up and he has to go.
Yeah.
Because he needs to, Yeah,
they just need to go get her, basically.
Yeah.
Receives medical attention. Doctor working underground with him. Like, he's like, no hospitals. Like, you can't take me to the hospital.
Yeah.
So they get a guy that they know. Shaft tells Ben to, get his men together and meet at the hotel where she's been taken, because one of his dudes followed him the whole time.
Right.
He's like, hey, keep an eye on him wherever he goes. And he's like, okay, they're at this hotel, right?
Yeah.
And so they need to get her back. He calls Bumpy, tells him his daughter's fine, and that he's going to need some taxi cabs to meet them at the hotel for the getaway. He's like, have them waiting, have them all set.
And then we get the final sequence.
Yeah.
Which is basically really fun. I mean, all the guys
really
put on
fun.
different costumes. They like knock out guys who work there, and they take their outfits.
Yeah, like the kitchen staff.
Yeah, and like the elevator man, like the doorman. And they kind of rush into this place.
Yep.
Use like a fire hose. They use guns.
Yeah,
This is not
all
interesting
over the
to
place.
break down beat by beat, but they do a bunch of action.
They've got the big stunt of him swinging from the top of the building in through the window
Crashing
and
through
shooting
window,
the guy,
shooting the guy.
which is like the poster, the original poster for the film.
Yep. And they get the daughter.
Yeah, it's just this whole action sequence, just fighting their way out of this hotel.
Yeah.
And then I like scenes like this in the build up, and the build up is really good, of like taking out the staff, getting the outfits and disguises, Shaft going to the roof. They're like, he's prepping his like Molotov cocktail or whatever. He's like, do you have anything flammable? And the guy's like going through his pack and trying to find stuff.
Oh yeah, and like gin and
And he's like, this is gin. Like, what? And he takes a drink of it, and then the guy tries to take a drink, and Shaft like knocks him. He's like, what are you doing? Come on.
Yeah.
This is really good.
We did forget to mention earlier that there is a scene. So Shaft does go home and to bed with that woman from the bar.
Right.
And they sleep together, and then he's like, well, hey, look, you got to go. I got some work to do. And she's
like,
like,
kicks
wow,
her
you're
out.
great on the sack, but you're real shitty afterwards.
Yeah.
And then as she's leaving, he's like, hey, will you close that door? And she goes, no, close it yourself, shitty.
And she laughs to herself.
She laughs to herself. She leaves.
And
Vic comes in right after that.
Yeah.
And then they have a whole conversation where Shaft breaks down his plan. And then he goes, and Vic starts to leave. And then he says the exact...
He just says the same thing to him
as
and
like,
laughs because he's like, I heard all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Which
this
is
comes
important.
into play. This is very important because after they've gotten the daughter out, they all get into taxi cabs and they all get away.
Yep.
And he gets in the telephone booth and he calls up Vic.
Yeah. And he says, it's all taken care of. I just blew your case
I just
wide
blew your
open.
case wide open. And then Vic says, well, Shaft, why don't you close it for me? And Shaft says, close it yourself, shitty. And then laughs
Like a boisterous laugh as he slams
walks
the
away.
phone down and walks away.
And then the credits roll. And that's the movie.
It's a really great final
It's
line.
fantastic.
It's
and the
so
laugh afterward is
fun.
great.
Oh man, I love it so much. Like you and I were just like, ah.
Yeah. Hell of a note to end on.
It's really great. And yeah, that's the
Shaft.
movie. That's Shaft.
Yeah.
So some more background on the film now that we've wrapped that up.
Nice.
Covered that. Something I thought was very interesting is that this movie basically saved MGM from bankruptcy.
Oh, okay.
So it a budget of $500,000. It grossed $15 million off of that. And it was just a huge blowout success. It won the Oscar for Best Original Song by Isaac Hayes. And I thought something that was really interesting. MGM hired a black advertising firm to do the marketing for the film.
Oh.
And so if you go watch the original promos and look at the pictures and the lobby cards, it's got a very distinct like flavor and style to it, which I really like. Like they had, let me see if I need to find like the exact phrasing because I thought this was just a fun like tagline they had for the film when it was being released. But like on one of the original taglines for the film on the poster was hotter than Bond, cooler than Bullet, which I just thought was, again, cool to like in the marketing specifically be drawing reference to like, you know, the two action heroes of the time of Steve McQueen's Bullet and, you know, James Bond. And it's like, he is of a caliber with those guys. And
he is.
Yeah. And I just thought that was very, very interesting to know that MGM hired like a black advertising firm
that's really interesting.
It's very cool.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's
I also wanted to
movie.
point out that this is the first franchise with a black lead. Ever.
Yeah.
So.
And it is a franchise.
It is a franchise.
It's had
it
reboots,
had two sequels. It had a TV show. It's had a soft reboot and a legacy sequel.
Yeah.
So it's had basically everything you can have as a franchise.
Right.
Animated Saturday cartoon, notwithstanding. I don't think they ever had that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of these R-rated franchises never quite get there.
But also a weird amount of them
do. Which is really strange. I don't know what's up with that. But
well, great. Criteria?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. So, you know, we already kind of touched upon some of the historical and technical relevance. Technical relevance.
Not a whole lot. Like they're playing around with like experimental film techniques of, again, POV and like ground level, like very, very early attempts at like Steadicam stuff. That sex scene with like the avant-garde color styles and things. Like there's things like that going on, but I wouldn't say that they're breaking any ground.
Yeah. And like this is like one of the like prime example, like highlight of blaxploitation films.
Totally.
But it's not the first.
No.
And like you said, it's not kind of the peak either. But it is obviously like
the first studio one, which is a big
first
deal.
studio one and like big franchise moment with a black lead, which is like a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I give this point to Kane still.
I think so too.
Just again.
Yeah. Recognizing everything that Shaft did and has continued to do.
Totally.
But I do think that everything that Citizen Kane did is still point to Kane.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
I feel good with that.
Cool. How well do you think this is doing what it's trying to do?
I think it does it pretty damn well. I don't. Everything that they're trying to do with it feels like it's hitting the ball out of the park. Like that was another thing they talked about in like the behind the scenes stuff is that the director also had he had some like amateur music experience as well. So he worked really closely with Isaac Hayes and wanted like the music to be a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And like that was, you know, very much wanted that to be just as much a part of the identity of the movie as anything else. And I think it does that really well. Like I want the soundtrack on vinyl so bad.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Like, man.
Absolutely. I am a little curious where like that, like that guitar, like sound started.
Yeah.
I'm curious when that kind of started.
I'd be curious to know as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause that feels like a huge like musical legacy. So I'd be curious to know what started that.
Totally.
And like what origins that has in music. But yeah, the music to this is really great.
Yeah. So
it's very watchable.
Yeah.
It's doing everything that it's trying to do very well. It is interesting that you mentioned that Gordon Parks didn't initially set out to make a blaxploitation film.
Yeah.
I wonder at what point that
like
shift happened.
Yeah.
Where he's like, I guess this is what we're doing now. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder as well. I couldn't find anything about like when that handoff happens, but it is interesting that like I think he succeeds on both fronts, right? Like he succeeds at making a 60s and 70s like cop action movie.
Yeah, totally.
With a black lead, and also he succeeds at making one of the texts of Blaxploitation.
Yeah, one of the definitive Blaxploitation films. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it doing it better than what Citizen Kane is doing at what it's trying to do?
They're close.
They're very close.
They're very close.
Yeah. This question's so interesting because it basically puts most movies at
Yeah.
the same level.
Totally. Like it's just like unless one of them is just completely like
Missing the mark.
yeah. Just completely off, right?
Yeah.
Let's come back to that one.
Let's come back to that
I'll
one.
think about that one.
How'd you connect with this? Do you like this?
I had a good time with
I mean,
this.
obviously, I think you'd rather watch this anytime.
Sure.
This is a very watchable movie, as we said.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so you'd say you connect with.
I think so. It's
trying to make you feel like
totally like there are more elements of this that have stayed on my mind, whether it's the jokes or the soundtrack or the final line.
Yeah.
Like in a way that I don't think I experienced with Kane when I walked out of it the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't sitting
Back
on my
in
brain the same way.
1941 when you walked out of the
Exactly,
theater.
that's exactly right. Yeah, when I got my official print and spooled it up on my projector in my
Right.
room.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think I would give the point to Shaft for me personally.
Yeah.
What about you?
God, it's so funny to say Kane and Shaft. Like, what's better?
I don't know. Man.
I don't know. This pair, like, yeah. Anyway, this podcast's great. I'm really up on it this week. Oh man, I mean, yeah, obviously, like, this is really fun, and I've excitedly told a lot of people in my life about mostly the last line.
Yeah.
Like, I was so thrilled by that.
Totally.
But is there an element of like, this is the first time I'd seen this, and I've seen Citizen Kane enough times now that I
Sure.
go, whatever. Like, if I didn't know anything about Citizen Kane, went into Citizen Kane, and then at the end I saw the sled burn, you'd think I'd come out and be like, oh my God, the ending of Citizen Kane. But because I knew the ending before I even saw the movie, and I'm so familiar with that,
Sure.
whereas with Shaft, I had no idea what this was about. It's hard to measure for me. But I guess I'll give the point to Shaft.
All right, let's come back to our tiebreaker then.
All right.
Oh, man.
I think I can give it to Shaft.
Yeah, I
it's
think so
doing very
too.
well.
Yeah, I think it's doing what it's trying to do really well. And
well.
like I can't
say it's doing it better than Citizen Kane, but I think it's doing it really well.
and I don't know what I would change about it.
No.
Right? Like as far as what it's trying to do.
If we were to ask that question of like, what would you change about
Right.
it? Nothing really.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it needs to be. And we've famously or infamously said multiple things we'd like to change about Citizen Kane.
Indeed.
Which I worry
And I will
come back
continue
to
to
bite
do
us
for
in the
years
ass.
to come.
Oh, okay, good. Well, great. Enjoy all of
By the end of this
ass
podcast,
biting.
I will have a script written that is a completely different movie with the title attached. That is my promise. That is my goal.
Oh man, studios are gonna love you, guy who wants to remake Citizen Kane. I just have some ideas.
I don't know. I think we could punch it up a little
I
bit.
think I could do much better.
I think I could do better.
I think I could do
than
much
the
better.
purported greatest film of all time.
Is that not the point of this podcast? But we're not saying we could make something
No,
better
of
than
course
Citizen Kane.
It's a bit.
Yeah, it is a bit.
capital B.
It is a bit. There's a question mark at the end of the title of this show because it's a question. We're not saying we are better. So we both give it to Shaft on the second criteria?
I think so.
So that's 2 points for Shaft.
Yep.
Taking a step back, do you think this is better than Citizen Kane?
It gets into what we've run into so many times where it's just like they're trying to do completely different things. They're completely different movies.
This is not trying to be Citizen Kane.
No.
Or better. Or, this exact level of it.
And so it's like, if we ever, when we look at like prestige dramas, it's going to be a lot easier to compare those two, right? But like this is like, it's so different.
It is, but also we have talked about so many movies that are so different.
Absolutely. No, we run into this a lot.
I don't think it is.
You don't think it is?
Just from a craft level. If we take it there.
Okay.
I think that Citizen Kane has a much, higher quality of craft. In that, if that makes sense, like, I don't know. This is clearly like a shot on like a lower budget,
Right.
It's still great. I'm not saying that makes it bad.
Yeah. That would that's the thing that I would be interested in, and I'm trying to look up right now. And it's not actually any sort of a tiebreaker, but just as you were talking, it kind of jogged my memory of just thinking about it, of like, yeah. So Citizen Kane's budget was around $850,000 in 1940s money.
Which for us today would mean, I would look it up, but
yeah, but it is definitely more than what Shaft is working with at its time frame.
Okay,
for sure.
yeah.
And so I was just curious about that, of like, I think you're right that like on a technical level, it's falling short, and I wonder how much of that is just
budget.
Yeah, there's just
I don't want to like bring in
money
like,
behind it.
well, this movie didn't have any money behind it, so it's worse.
Right.
Like I don't want to bring that argument in, but just like, I don't know if I can say that Shaft as a film is
I think
better. I mean, I think again, it's a completely different thing. If I didn't have to give an answer, I would say I think they're both great. Let's end the show forever. We don't need to ask this question anymore. But
I think, to your point, I think Shaft as an idea is better than Citizen Kane. I think Shaft as this film is not.
Okay. Yes.
Is where I'll stand.
Okay, great.
Because I like the concept. I like the character.
Idea of Shaft. It doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, exactly. I took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Except it does
Max.
appeal to you because you did enjoy it.
Yeah, I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
And like, just through my own tastes, I am much more likely to turn this on with a group of people than I am to watch Citizen Kane with a group of people or by myself.
Yeah.
But I will agree with you that I think like taking the film as a film, removing it from its context of Blaxploitation, removing it from its context of the franchise that it spawned and the historic ways that it led forward, I think taking the film as a film, I will say that Citizen Kane is better than Shaft.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Taking a step back.
Yeah.
While still really enjoying the movie, and I will probably watch this again sooner than I'm going to watch Citizen Kane again.
Of course. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, again, we already gave it both points. It won 2 out of 3 points.
Totally.
But I just,
Yeah.
great.
Cool.
But everyone should check out Shaft.
You should.
It's a good movie. I know we told you everything about it. You should watch it.
Yeah. I think this is one of those that, like, I've obviously most of the movies we've watched I would recommend to people. But this one specifically, I'm like, if you haven't watched it, go check it out.
Yeah, and if it's like up your alley. Like if you're interested in like action films and stuff like that.
You'll have a good time with it,
Check this out. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, all right.
Well, next week, who knows?
A big blank slate.
We do have a guest on.
We do have a guest.
We haven't confirmed fully. The guest has agreed to do it.
Yeah.
But we don't want to make any promises.
Yeah, we don't want to paint anybody into a corner. So we will have a guest next week.
And we'll have a movie.
Fairly sure we know who
too.
it is. And we will have a movie next week as well of our guest choosing.
Ooh.
So this is like the mystery flavored Airheads.
It is.
That's what this is.
It's exactly like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what we're getting. We don't know what we're getting.
We don't know either.
Yeah. So look forward to that in a couple weeks.
But yeah, thanks everybody for listening as always.
Thank you so much.
And yeah,
take care.
Shaft.
Yeah. Bye everybody.